Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad to have you with us on the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away today. His replacement is the august Andrew C. McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, contributing editor at National Review Online. He's also a Fox News contributor and the author of Ball of Collusion. Andy, happy Friday. I feel like with all the major news events this week, we desperately need a little bit of a break.
Oh, Greg, great to be here with you. Miss Jim, of course. I think he's just getting himself ready for the conference finals on Sunday in the NFL. But I should have known. I should have known the call to the bullpen was coming because I've been in the Midwest and I took my wife out for dinner last night, and I said, I'm going to have a martini. And it was I did, and here we are. So I guess. Maybe we'll see as you ask me questions and we discuss this, what the wages of the martini are. I don't know.
Well, as a fellow Jets fan, are you more excited that the Dolphins and Bills are out, or are you still excited about who's left?
I'm not. It's funny. I'm not. When I was a kid, I was kind of wired that way. Like I'm a Met fan, and if the Yankees lost, that was almost as good for me as if the Mets won, and I was the same way. But anymore, I just I do have some like sort of rooting interests because I've never liked the Ravens, and I've kind of fallen in love with this Lions story. So against my better judgment, I mean, this is like probably the wrong way to go, but I'm going with the Chiefs and the Lions. So we can be pretty sure that you and Jim will be talking about the Ravens and the Niners come Monday.
Andy, let's dig into our martinis today, and there are no good ones. Yeah. I guess the chaser to this first one is a little bit of a silver lining, but nonetheless, let's talk about the International Court of Justice. Cue the eye roll. The UN's main court. South Africa, of all nations, has decided to challenge Israel at the ICJ, accusing it of genocide against the Palestinians. Because, of course, if there's any country on the planet, Andy, who is a paragon of virtue when it comes to genocide, it's South Africa. But as the ruling comes down today, South Africa didn't get everything they wanted, because what they wanted was an immediate ceasefire ordered by the ICJ, which Israel would have promptly ignored anyway. But the ICJ also telling Israel it has to take measures to prevent its forces from committing acts of genocide against Palestinians. It also said Israel must allow humanitarian aid to the Palestinians and not destroy any evidence related to the case. These quote-unquote provisional measures are different than the main ask requested by South Africa, which again was a total and immediate ceasefire. So you've got the group that not only committed genocide on October 7th, but has said they're going to do it as many times as is necessary to wipe out Israel. And the ICJ, while not doing everything South Africa wanted to do here, is basically agreeing in principle that Israel is the bad guy here. Now, you have said that the ICJ is basically a farce and deserves no respect whatsoever. And I think most conservatives would agree with that. But what do you make of this latest chapter?
Well, I love that you set it up with South Africa, which, my hobby horse for a million years has been international law, which I think is a joke as law. But you're quite correct to focus on South Africa, which in the way of, in terms of genocide, that's like having Ted Williams as your batting coach. If anyone knows genocide, it's South Africa. So I guess that's the reason we have to pay attention to them, right? I think international law, so-called, is just politics masquerading as law. It's basically transnational progressivism, which puts a black robe on to pretend that it's got more legitimacy than it actually has. In terms of our view in the West, and I should make it more narrow than the West because the Europeans love this stuff too. But I think our view in the United States is that it's not legitimate to have a tribunal that's beyond the reach of anybody who, if you took it seriously, whose lives would be affected by its rulings. And as a result, the United States basically told it to pound sand in the 80s when it tried to get itself mixed up in the Reagan administration's South American politics. So I'm unhappy, of course, as anybody should be, that the ICJ has done this, but I'm really more concerned about what it says about the political messaging, because again, as law, it's meaningless. But in terms of the political messaging, it's another brick in this wall that is trying to create a global consensus, and it has made more inroads in the United States than, especially on the campus, than any of us should be comfortable with, that Israel's existence is illegitimate. That if it defends its territory, it's committing genocide because the territory belongs to the Palestinians, and Israel's creation is at best an accident and at worst an insidious plot. And it just creates a situation that is, it's preposterous. Basically, as you just pointed out, you have a terrorist organization that not only carried out an unspeakable atrocity on October 7th, but has essentially promised that it will do it again and again and again as long as it takes. And it reminds me, Greg, of when I prosecuted the blind sheikh and his cabal of jihadists back in the 80s. We had audible gasps from the jury when I played a translation of a talk that the blind sheikh had given, or actually kind of a rally speech he had given, where in speaking about how the jihadists should go about attacking America in the West and regarding it as the head of the snake, he said that if the Islamic armies that he was talking about, if they would do 2 or 3 or 4 operations that were like the ones that were done to the Marines in Beirut, that America would leave the region, that it wouldn't have the stomach for the fight. And back in those days, this was the 90s, I guess, the attack by Hezbollah on the U.S. Marines in 1983 in Beirut that killed 241 of our Marines was still a fresh enough memory that people, it really hit people over the head. It certainly hit the jury, I think, over the head with this idea that the jihadists were legitimizing atrocious ways of doing war, with the idea that if they did it often enough and you had the threat in the air that they would do it even more often, that would cause the West to surrender. America was the great Satan and Israel was the little Satan, but it's the same idea. So you have this situation where Hamas can come in and commit these atrocities and promise to do it again and again. And of course, they will do it again if they get the opportunity. And if Israel defends itself, it's genocide. I mean, you just can't even wrap your brain around it.
No, that's exactly right. And at the same time, when we're talking about where the UN really stands on an issue like this, the Free Beacon's got a story on it. Caitlin Collins of CNN sums it up pretty quickly. She says the State Department, quote, has temporarily paused additional funding to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, amid allegations that 12 of the UN agency's employees were involved in the Hamas attack, per state spokesman Matt Miller. Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken spoke with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on January 25th to emphasize the necessity of a thorough and swift investigation of this matter. So when one of your satellite organizations is seriously accused of being part of the genocidal attacks on October 7th, it's not exactly a surprise that the court is similarly inclined.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, this isn't like a one-off. There's a long history of this component of the UN aiding and abetting Hamas, to the point that, like, if we were going to apply normal American conspiracy principles, the UNRWA might as well be the Hamas conspiracy, because it's been a knowing aider and abetter of it for all these years. I remember, I'm going back to my prosecutor days again and again here, but, in the old days, we used to do mafia cases, and the bad guys would try to make a distinction between who was a member of the mafia and who was an associate. And one of the things we always used to come back with is the idea that the law doesn't recognize the niceties and the distinctions of the bad guys between themselves. If they're all involved in the same criminal agreement, then they're all members of the same conspiracy. And I think that's exactly what you can say about the UNRWA and Hamas. They've been pulling the oar in the same direction for, since the mid-1980s when Hamas was formed.
Well, this court's legitimacy has been very much in doubt from conservatives for a very, very long time. However, as we'll talk about later in the podcast, it's a different court that the left is constantly trying to delegitimize. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. But in the meantime, let's talk about our great sponsor of 4Patriots. Head to 4patriots.com/martini, where you can find the fantastic deals on products from generators to survival food kits and a whole lot more. In fact, right now you can get the Halo XT Tactical Solar Flashlight 4-pack for only $119. You can also get the Solar Go Fridge, which will keep things cold and not need ice. As we mentioned, don't forget about those best-selling survival food kits, but also the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. A lot of areas hitting winter storms. Not here on the East Coast today because we're in the 70s, but winter is still here and it's going to be here for a while. Make sure that if your power goes out, you're ready with a generator that will charge more devices for longer in a blackout with double the capacity and more peak power than ever before. Make sure that fridge, freezer, medical devices, and so much more are ready to go. It never needs gas. It comes with a solar panel, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit 4patriots.com/martini to see this week's discounts and deals before they're gone, and get free shipping on orders over $97. Save more and get peace of mind now by going to the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Andy, on to our next bad martini, and this one is going to take us away from the courtroom, at least for a moment. Let's move over to Joe Biden's latest energy policy gaffe, and of course, he's trying to cater to the Greens here. You've noticed that gas prices have gone down compared to the worst prices that we had under the Biden administration, but they're still considerably more than when he took office. A lot of experts say he's quietly been doing rational things to try and bring them down, so it's not a major issue come election time. But he's still got a base of environmental crazies that he's got to make happy here. And so here's the NBC News version of the story. The Biden administration is pausing approvals of pending applications for liquefied natural gas exports to countries with which the United States does not have free trade agreements, citing environmental concerns related to climate change as a key reason for the move. While the temporary halt is in effect, the Energy Department is expected to evaluate and update the guidance used to make authorizations. The pause allows for exceptions to be made for unanticipated and immediate national security emergencies. But the crazy part here, Andy, is that natural gas burns so much cleaner than the other stuff that these people were so fanatical about before, coal and oil itself and all these, more traditional ways of gathering energy from fossil fuels. Major headway has been made in processing all of them, natural gas being one of them. But ever since the fracking boom and the transition towards natural gas, it seems like the left has figured out that they've got to be opposed to this now, I guess, even though it's much, much better for the environment because there's an abundance of it, I guess they didn't realize existed in the amounts that it does. So what's your take on the Biden administration, what appears to be here another political move?
Well, I certainly hope that all the 3 Martini Lunch listeners in Europe were writing down your 4 Patriots information when you were doing the spot, because I think they may need it. This is I think it's really Biden selling out to the Russians after all of the bombast about the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, this is just like exactly the opposite of what you would do if you were serious about that venture. But there's not really seriousness about this. This is like this kind of Manichaean, almost quasi-religious outlook where fossil fuels are evil, and that's the end of the discussion. If these guys were really serious about clean energy and the environment, we'd all be doing nuclear, right? And if we're not doing nuclear, natural gas is the next best thing in terms of clean energy, minimal impact on the environment, and yet the possibilities of economic flourishing. And they turn their back on it because, as you just said, it's fossil fuels, it's fracking, it represents all the things that they despise. More, I think, of a feel thing, Greg, than like a logic thing. But I think we're going to see more of this because Biden, I think, feels like he can't completely turn his back on Israel, even though there's been an attrition of the support there. And I kind of feel like this is analogous to what I thought Biden would do with the Justice Department at the beginning of his term. That is to say, he didn't have the legislative margin to deliver the kind of FDR-type progressive administration that he dreamed of and that those historians told him he could replicate at the beginning of his term. So what I always thought was because he wouldn't be able to get the legislative accomplishments, what they would do is use the Justice Department, which allows them to act unilaterally in various different spheres in order to move the progressive ball up the field. And here, I think, there are certain things in terms of foreign policy that he needs to accomplish for the betterment of, for the national security and national interest of the United States, but which are intensely unpopular on the left. So he's going to have to continue to give them gestures and kind of rhetorical exercises like this one, because I think it's going to end up being more rhetorical than anything else. But he needs to kind of to nod in their direction so that he can at least quietly go about doing the things that have to be done if he wants to be a viable candidate in November.
No, I think that's exactly right. And, the fact that it actually helps the Russians dominate the region is so counterproductive. And then the statement coming from the president, which, let's be honest, he may or may not have ever even seen, much less written, but it's got a ton of gaslighting in here, which I think is incredibly hypocritical since he doesn't like gas. It says, this pause on new liquefied natural gas approvals sees the climate crisis for what it is, the existential threat of our time, while MAGA Republicans willfully deny the urgency of the climate crisis, condemning the American people to a dangerous future. My administration will not be complacent. So I got all your buzzwords in there, and anybody who disagrees with him is an evil extremist, Andy.
What are the consequences for Hunter's Porsche? Does anyone know? Do we know that yet? Have we gotten an answer on that one?
If there weren't double standards, there'd be no standards at all. With
That's right.
People. So he's definitely one of them. All right. Well, maybe Biden just needs more sleep. Certainly, I could use some more trying to keep up with how his brain is working, or in most cases not working these days. But magnesium is a critical mineral to getting that type of excellent sleep. And the best place to get it is through Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizers. And right now you can get 10% off any order at biooptimizers.com/martini by using the promo code martini. And while a lot of magnesium supplements might give you 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough actually contains all 7 forms of magnesium, which will help to calm your mind, help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and perhaps most importantly of all, wake up refreshed. It also helps to improve digestion, supports muscle recovery, and supports healthy bone density. A lot of pluses here. So do yourself a favor and make Magnesium Breakthrough part of your daily routine this year so you can get the vitality you need to conquer your dreams. Go to biooptimizers.com/martini and enter the promo code martini to get 10% off any order. Again, that's biooptimizers.com/martini, biooptimizers.com/martini. All right, we promised you more court lunacy, and we are going to deliver here in the Crazy Martini. This is over at Politico in an opinion piece released yesterday. It's written by Bruce Ackerman, who is a professor of law and political science at Yale University. So if you want to send your kids to the Ivies, just know people like this are teaching classes up there. And the title is Trump's Supreme Court Justices Must Kick Him Off the Ballot. And of course, just like anything, any major case, any politically charged case that has come before the court since the Trump years and a conservative majority on the court, if that conservative majority doesn't go the way Bruce Ackerman wants them to, well, let's just put it out there. Their legitimacy is in serious, serious doubt. He says, as the Supreme Court weighs whether to disqualify Donald Trump from the 2024 elections, it should quickly become apparent to the justices that their own constitutional legitimacy, no less than Trump's, hangs in the balance. And of course, this is about the Colorado Supreme Court decision to bar Trump from the ballot based on the third clause of the 14th Amendment, which says that if you're responsible for an insurrection, you're not allowed to seek political office. And there have been a lot of different interpretations of that. It was obviously written in the wake of the Civil War and actually formally rebelling against the country, being part of the Confederacy and so forth. And so the idea here, Andy, is that because of that original intent and that Bruce Ackerman thinks it applies to this case, that anyone who considers themselves an originalist, which most of the conservative justices do, well, if they're really honest about that standing, then they're going to rule against the guy who nominated them. I'm assuming here that he doesn't believe that Thomas or Alito are gettable from his position. And so he thinks that along with John Roberts, the three liberals, there needs to be one other, one of those Trump appointees, Kavanaugh, Coney Barrett, or Gorsuch, to go along with him. In fact, I believe the Colorado Supreme Court actually cited a ruling by Neil Gorsuch trying to make their case and maybe sway his vote. Most of the people that I heard immediately after that Colorado decision, Andy, suggested this was going to be a slam dunk rejection by the U.S. Supreme Court. But what do you make of Ackerman and others saying that this is totally constitutional legitimate, including Judge Mike Ludig, who others had wanted as a Republican nominee to the high court years ago, including Ted Cruz, basically suggesting that if the Supreme Court is honoring its oath here and honoring originalism, well, Trump's got to go.
Well, look, I think Bruce Ackerman's a pretty effective progressive academic. But what you notice about this article that he wrote, this essay in Politico, it goes on for hundreds of words, but there's very little about originalism in it. You would think that if somebody is going to make the case that an originalist interpretation of the Constitution demands that Trump be booted on the basis of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that he would lay out what his evidence is. And, there's a lot of rhetoric in here, but there's no discussion of originalism. So my suggestion to people is if you want to understand the originalist case on this, maybe you should read it from, an originalist. So Bill Barr, who is one, wrote a very good essay in the Free Press about, I want to say probably 3, maybe more weeks ago, where he explains that he is an anti-Trump person. He is opposing Trump in the primary, may ultimately oppose him in the election. I don't know what he'll do. But even so, the case for kicking him off the ballot isn't there, and certainly not on originalist terms. And what Bill would say about this, and has said about it, is that the original understanding of the 14th Amendment and this particular provision is that there had to be a process for booting somebody off the ballot. And Section 5 of the 14th Amendment gives Congress the power to make laws and processes that enforce the provisions of all the 14th Amendment, which is obviously the most important of the amendments to come out of or in the aftermath of the Civil War. So not just Section 3, but things like equal protection of law and the like. So what Barr points out is that about a year after the 14th Amendment was ratified, Congress enacted a couple of statutes. One was a civil law statute that allowed lawsuits that were based on this claim of having someone be culpable for participation in an insurrection. That statute was later in the 20th century repealed. But the other statute that Congress enacted was what became and still exists on the books as the crime of insurrection in the federal criminal code. And I point that out, Greg, because not a single person has been prosecuted for insurrection in the United States. I mean, think about it. The Justice Department, which is still arresting people, has prosecuted 1,200 people for crimes arising out of the Capitol riot, and not a single one has been charged with insurrection. It would be impossible to charge Trump with insurrection because the inconvenience here, and I say this as somebody who thinks he is politically and morally culpable for what happened on January 6th, but as a legal matter, and that's very different from moral culpability and political culpability, you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody committed all of the elements of whatever crime you charge, whether it's incitement or insurrection or incitement to insurrection, which is what the House of Representatives cited when they impeached him. And they don't have, the reason they haven't charged him is not that they don't want to make an insurrection case against Trump. It's that they lack the evidence. You know, you simply can't arrest somebody or prosecute somebody for incitement when he has said we're going to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. You may believe that he only said it tongue in cheek and he really didn't believe that. But as a prosecutor, you're not going to have a case on him for that. So why hasn't Jack Smith, who's extraordinarily aggressive, brought an insurrection case? Because there isn't one. So I think that the problem Ackerman has is the best interpretation of the original understanding of the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was that you had to prove that somebody was guilty of insurrection under the process that Congress provided, and that process was criminal prosecution. They just don't have it.
Very well explained, Andy. And I should also point out there's one interesting wrinkle that I actually didn't expect in this story, and that's that he's basically saying we can probably get rid of Biden as well if Trump's not on the ballot, because Biden has said if Trump wasn't running, I'm not sure I'd be running. So he's basically arguing to dump Trump so Biden decides to get out, and so we can have people who aren't ready for the old folks home on the ballot this year, which is an interesting turn for a guy who's got an incumbent president from his party.
Yeah, well, he's got to be a Democrat, because a Republican wouldn't make that argument. They'd figure that Kamala was the insurance to make sure that argument would never go anyplace.
Yeah, I don't know that that's worked out certainly the way she expected, and perhaps not the way even he expected either. But we've gotten a lot of giggles, only from her, but not a lot of. Oh wow, that's going on a loop.
Hey, as Biden once said, so there.
A couple of times this week, in fact. So they're only sending their best. Andy, thanks so much for being here. As always, have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, Greg. You too. Enjoy the football.
Thank you. Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. He's also contributing editor at National Review. He's also a Fox News contributor and the author of Ball of Collusion. In for Jim Garrity today, who should be back on Monday. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow all of us on X. Andy is at Andrew C. McCarthy. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend and join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.